DC Comics are not in the best place they've ever been. Jim Lee seems to be running a ship basically set on making Batman the only focus of DC Comics. Superman can't sell. Really nothing can sell. Not even Justice League right now. There needs to probably be some change. We know we got this WarnerMedia Discover merger coming up. Don't think that we'll see change at DC Comics immediately, but I think some change probably is in the future. And we do know that Jim Lee makes a lot of money compared to everyone else in DC Comics. And one of the things that David Zaslav, the new CEO, is looking to do is trim off a lot of that money. Let's talk about some of the people that we think could potentially replace DC Comics if they decided to go in that direction. Here with me to talk about that is one of the writers from Young Justice Season 4, the man behind Darkwing Duck, editor extraordinaire, Aaron Sparrow. How you doing, Aaron?
Doing great. How you doing, Wes?
I'm doing very well. So you have done some work in animation. You done work in comic books. You've been a lifelong DC fan.
Yeah. I'm a lifetime comics fan in general. Love DC Comics. Love their universe. Love Marvel. Love a lot of independent stuff. I collect all this stuff. I live it. I've loved it since I was a kid. Unfortunately, in the last several years, Marvel and to a greater extent DC have not been loving us back as fans.
Yeah, it's not in a good place right now. It probably needs a new direction, a new leadership. They certainly replaced a lot of leadership, but they need someone new at the top. One of the weird things about Jim Lee, as the man in charge of DC Comics, he also has influence and say in what happens in like animation, television, and on the big screen. Supposedly he's like the czar that's responsible to make sure that all the DC characters, when they're presented in any medium, are true to the characters and whatnot. So there is a little bit of extra responsibility with the position that goes beyond comic books. There's 3 names that I hear a lot. If they were to replace Jim Lee, that would be good candidates for it. Paul Dini, Bruce Timm, Geoff Johns. Me personally, I'm a Geoff Johns guy on this one, but we know that his eye is more towards the entertainment, like movie, television side of things. People have been really pounding the drum for Bruce Timm, but I know you're more of a Paul Dini guy.
Yeah, I think if you look at the, obviously Bruce Timm, Paul Dini both worked on Batman and the animated series and the Superman animated series, and these moments in DC history that are really held up as kind of the definitive versions of these characters in media. I'm gonna say that the output that we've seen from Bruce Timm without Paul Dini in his corner rules him out as a person who could step in and take over this. I don't think that he is obviously he's a fantastic artist. He's got a great visual style that really worked for those characters. But I don't think that creatively, I don't think from a writing standpoint that he's the strength of that relationship. I think that all came from Paul. I think that the strength of the writing and the strength of the representation of the characters, I think that's all Paul Dini. And I think that Bruce Timm's output without Paul, things like that Harley Quinn movie that they did, Batman and Harley Quinn movie that they did, just the feel of things and the feel of the animation since then will bear me out on that. So I think, Geoff Johns, obviously, I'm also a Geoff Johns guy. I think he does fantastic stuff with the universe. Unfortunately, politically speaking, it might not be the best move since he had all that controversy from all the accusations leveled on him by Ray Fisher. So he might not be the choice that they want to go with. So if you were asking me who I think the solid choice is at this point, I would say that Paul Dini is the man.
So obviously, to be in charge of DC Comics, you want someone that understands the DC universe, the DC characters. I can say without a shadow of a doubt, I believe Paul Dini is that guy. And a lot of people do appreciate or think that there are better versions of the characters in the animated universes that he's created than we've gotten in comic books for quite some time. Another thing that's important is you need to have relationships with the talent. The key talent that you would bring in, whether it be on the editorial staff, but specifically the writing and artistic side, so you can really put the right creators with the right characters and really, bump the sales up and have some good long-term success. We're seeing so many sales blowing up on the book side. DC Comics has not kept up with that, and they need somebody that can put the right teams together where those things will translate. It's not just Watchmen or the Dark Knight Returns that are selling as far as graphic novels outside of just comic shops. Do you think Paul Dini really has those connections as far as creators to bring in on those books?
Yeah, I definitely think so. He's been in the industry a long time. He knows a lot of people. He knows a lot of talented artists. He's worked with a lot of talented artists. He obviously knows what it is to be a good writer. So he would definitely be able to bring in good writers. The main question with Paul is whether or not he would have the interest in taking such a position. I think that if it was, I think that they could probably get him if it was a position that, was involved with the movies, the comics, the, just overall presentation of these characters, not like necessarily an editor-in-chief position, but just an overall position of this is how these characters are presented. It still boggles my mind that DC's movie slate has been such a disaster for the most part, and so mishandled and so bungled out of the gate trying to catch up with Marvel when they had the perfect template. And that perfect template was the Batman animated series up through Justice League Unlimited. That was the best way to present those characters. That's all they had to do was look at that and say, how do we translate this to live action? And it would have worked. And so I think that, Paul would be the guy to make that happen. You just reboot everything. You can even bring back some of the same actors. I think a lot of us would like to see Henry Cavill continue to be Superman, but we'd actually like to see him play the character of Superman in a Superman movie, which we have not gotten up until this point.
You didn't like Hyperion Superman?
No, I didn't like Murder Man versus Captain Hypocrite.
By all accounts, from what I'm told, DC Comics is still right now profitable. They are still generating revenue, but you're right, with the amount invested in, there isn't a whole lot of bang for your buck. The one thing that it really does is continue the IP production cycle where you can create new characters like a Punchline associated with a character like Joker and Batman and whatnot. But I don't know, do you even need that to be in the cartoon or in the comic books anymore with all the programming that's going to be on HBO Max? You could put that in the cartoons and stuff. Harley Quinn became an icon within comic books, and that wasn't originally a comic book character.
No, that was an animated character. It's interesting because the movie studios continually go their own way on the films. You're seeing it with Marvel. They may draw a couple of things from the comic books, but mostly it's from comic books that are 20 years old or more that they're drawing from, except for where we're getting like Miss Marvel show and things like that. Kate Bishop, obviously, more recent creation that they're trying to work in, but that's not really working.
They fixed the Kate Bishop thing, though.
Yeah, they definitely fixed Kate Bishop by completely changing her character, and it looks like they're doing the same thing with Miss Marvel. I mean, it looks like she's a completely different character, just with stuffed in the skin of the comic book version. So they don't really need this IP farm anymore. They've got Marvel's got all this backlog of history, and DC's got even more of it that they can draw from, and it seems like the movie creators go their own way anyway. I do think that it makes more sense to have DC as an IP farm, but only if you go through and you cull all these terrible writers that are contributing things that will never make it to the big screen, that, stories that will never be memorable and not be talked about, in 20 years. They're not even going to be talked about a year from now. So what you need to do is you need to pay people more. If you want DC to be healthy, you need somebody with a good vision, like a Paul Dini, to come in, clean house, relaunch the line with new writers and new artists that are more talented and are getting paid more. You got to spend money to make money. And so, if you want to save DC, that's what you got to do. But if you're going to just do cost cutting measures and continue to pay, a bunch of hacks $25 a page, you get what you pay for.
I do believe the future of DC Comics is absolutely tied to the DC films, the DCEU and its future and what they see for that. There were rumors out there that when Zaslav, as he's been getting ready to take over for WarnerMedia, like one of his plans was just to fire anyone associated with the DCEU because he thought it's been such a terrible launch and not very well connected. To get like a Kevin Feige, a producer in there to kind of run everything, a central voice that can approve the shared connectivity of the universe and stuff like that. Comic books can be very good marketing. It can be a very good test place for ideas and stuff like that, and it can be done very cheaply. Mm-hmm. And I do think there can be a future for DC Comics in that vein, but also for the fans as well. But they need to get an idea. They need to come to a decision. What is the DC universe gonna be for WarnerMedia and Discovery? What's it gonna be in the movies? What's it gonna be in animation, video games, children's graphic novels, and in comic books? Because if you look at it, despite the idea that Jim Lee is responsible to make sure the characters are portrayed somewhat similarly throughout the mediums, they absolutely aren't. Like if you go to like Gotham High or whatever that book is, that has no reflection on what's going on in Batman, which has no reflection what's going on with Batwoman, which certainly has no reflection what's going on with the Batman movie. And it just, there's nothing that feels like connected between any of them. It just feels like a million ideas thrown in a million different directions.
Yeah, it's the very definition of throwing shit against the wall and seeing if it sticks. And nothing's sticking. That wall is Teflon. It's just all sliding off. I'm definitely somebody who is in favor of trying new things and trying new versions of things, but there has to be a unified plan behind it, and there has to be a unified marketing plan for that. And what audience are we reaching for? And what's the audience going to respond to? And how do we connect all these things? The Gotham High was put out at a time that like YA is struggling. It's not the cash cow that it was 10 years ago when everybody went nuts for it. And it's interesting. So you do need somebody with a unified vision of who the characters are and the way that they're going to be presented. And I think that Paul Dini definitely has the talent. I've been fortunate enough to know Paul. I've had lunch with him. He is just an idea factory. You can throw a DC character at him. Like you could be sitting there with him and you'd go, "Hey, what would you do with Rainbow Raider?" And like in 20 seconds, like he'll kind of like lean back and he'll think for a minute and then he'll come at you with a pitch for that character. And you're like, oh my God, that's amazing. I did that to him with, I think it was Bookworm, from the old 60s Batman series. And he had a pitch for Bookworm that I was like, I want to read that book. That he just thought about like on the fly. He's that good. And so, there's still a lot of creativity in these guys that they've kind of cast aside because, they're like, oh, well, they're the old school and, it's a new generation coming up and things like that. But, it hasn't borne out. The new generation, unfortunately, they grew up. They don't have a lot of life experience to draw on. They grew up, pretty pampered and, with a pretty easy life. There's not a lot of stories in there. You need guys who know how to do this kind of stuff. Like Jack Kirby. He drew on all his war experiences and all these life experiences to create things like the New Gods and it's amazing. So, you need to not cast people aside just because they're a little bit older. There's a lot of people that still have a lot to contribute. And I think Paul's one of those guys.
Well, if you look at the breadth of work that he's done a shared superhero universe that wasn't in comic books. It's been very successful. He was able to do crossovers. He's been able to manage people. He's been able to utilize them to their best abilities. And he's been able to manage characters and teams of characters and really make them function well within a universe that all kind of makes sense. So he almost is the perfect person for this. And he certainly has done comic books. That's important. And he does have the context. So I am still a Geoff Johns guy. I think when he was the chief creative officer, DC Comics was in its last really good period. But Geoff Johns does have some problems with some controversy. He's definitely had some allegations that are out there. I imagine Warner Brothers and Discovery and all those people are very aware of them, and they might be somewhat hesitant. But Paul Dini does feel like he would almost be the perfect person. If you threw them in there, we would have a really good – you get back to the foundation of the characters, but you can do something different with them at the same time. Yeah,
absolutely. And, he knows a lot of people in animation. And that's the other thing that I think gets overlooked often is you have these people in animation who do these great versions of these characters, but they don't get considered for the movie, for doing the movie script or overseeing the movie universe. They're not even considered because they're animation people. It's almost like they're the redheaded stepchildren. And I got to tell you, having written animated scripts now, it's a lot more involved than you think it is. There's so much more direction that has to go into it because you don't have an actor there doing the physical performance and interpreting it. So you have to put all that detail in. So, for them to look down on animation writers in favor of Hollywood screenwriters, I think it's to the detriment of the product and to the detriment of their financial bottom line.
We definitely want to hear from all the fans. Like, who would you like to see replaced? If they decided to replace Jim Lee, who do you think would be the perfect person? We talked in depth, obviously, about Paul Dini here. We talked a little bit about Geoff Johns. Bruce Timm, obviously, has been brought up as well. But who do you think should be the man to take the reins at DC Comics? As it does feel like we do need some change relatively soon. This isn't the only conversation I've talked about. Maybe some changes that could happen at DC Comics. At the end of last year, I talked about 5 things DC Comics could do that could really change their fortunes. Definitely check this video out. It's a really good conversation. I love DC Comics, and I definitely want to see it turned around because I want to enjoy multiple DC Comics every single week.